exit from ECOWAS would be much worse than the sanctions in terms of the hardship that it would place the citizens of these three countries. So we don't wish it upon them.
African countries are leaving ECOWAS, which stands for the Economic Community of West African States. This is because many believe that ECOWAS is a puppet organization created to make African countries align with Western interests. Initially, only a few people knew about this. But when ECOWAS threatened to invade Niger and impose sanctions, the true intentions became clear. ECOWAS was never intended to benefit African countries, but to exert control over them. Consequently, as more crises like the ongoing one in Senegal have emerged, ECOWAS has lost its value and is proving to be useless. It is concerning that no one is willing to acknowledge this. As a response, ECOWAS has called for an emergency session to engage with nations such as Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Senegal. The purpose of this session is to discuss and decide on matters that can bring about significant changes. The primary reason for convening this emergency ECOWAS session is the crisis unfolding in Senegal, which has the potential to escalate into a civil war. This is deeply troubling for stakeholders in Africa and the continent's loyal leadership. However, what initially went wrong in Senegal? Just a few days ago, the Senegalese parliament voted to postpone the nation's presidential election until December 15, 2024. This decision was made amidst a chaotic voting process that ensued after security forces intervened to break up an opposition attempt to obstruct the vote. The lawmakers were forcibly removed from the legislative building. One provision of the election delay bill, which was approved by the National Assembly, extended President Macky Sall's term. Initially, his term was set to end on April 2nd, but it will now continue until the new election takes place. In July, Sall had announced that he would not seek a third term in office, but the current situation raises uncertainty about his plans. However, postponing the election does not indicate a progressive path. The African Union had urged the Senegalese government to hold the election as soon as possible and encouraged opposition candidates to resolve any political disputes through consultation, understanding, and civilized dialogue. Unfortunately, the president took no action, which led to protests outside the parliamentary building. Security forces deployed tear gas, while protesters ignited tires, blocked roads, and chanted slogans denouncing Macky Sall as a dictator. Several individuals, including two opposition candidates, including former Prime Minister Aminata Touré, were arrested but later released.
A deceptive calm is more like it, an eerie calm, because it's broken, this silence, by the sound of tear gas. Look behind me. On every street corner, there is billowing like smoke, and protesters have shut down every street corner where we are. And we're seeing security forces really overrun, at least in this neighborhood. We're just a block away from where the gathering was supposed to take place, what was supposed to be a peaceful demonstration against the move by President Macky Sall, as you explained it, to delay the elections. But look at the state of affairs now in what is normally one of the most stable democracies in the region.
Senegal's political stability has been fragile for almost a year. In June 2023, the authorities cut off internet access after clashes between supporters of a disqualified opposition leader and security forces. This was the first time in Senegal's history that presidential elections had been postponed. Opposition leaders condemned President Sall's decision to delay the elections, calling it a coup. Senegal has been praised for its stability in the West African region, and it has not experienced a coup since gaining independence from France in the 1960s. However, the recent events have raised concerns about the country's ability to maintain political and economic stability. As a result of the unrest, Senegal's sovereign dollar bonds have suffered a significant decline. Additionally, the government restricted mobile internet access, and a private television network had its broadcasting license revoked after its signal was disrupted during protest coverage. All of these developments indicate a growing crisis that has the potential to escalate into a violent conflict difficult to control. Amnesty International criticized the government's Sudan internet restrictions, stating that they violated the right to freedom of expression and press rights protected by Senegal's constitution. The Ministry of Communication, Telecommunication, and Digital Economy defended the decision, citing the dissemination of hateful and subversive messages on social networks that pose threats and disturbances to public order. Human rights organizations have warned Senegal about the risk of losing its democratic progress. Senegal has long been seen as a democratic leader in the region, but this reputation is now at risk. Authorities must take action to prevent violence, address abuses by security forces, and halt their crackdown on the opposition and media. Upholding freedom of speech, expression, and assembly is crucial, as is restoring internet access to steer Senegal back onto its democratic path. The United States and the European Union have urged the Senegalese government to return to the original election schedule. However, Senegal's foreign minister has indicated that the government is not inclined to listen to anyone's advice.
The president has initiated a dialogue. The situation doesn't require external intervention from ECOWAS, AU, or other bodies.
President Sall stated that he postponed the election due to a dispute between Parliament and the Constitutional Council regarding potential candidates and concerns about the resurgence of unrest seen in 2021 and 2023. Parliament endorsed Sall's decision to postpone the election until December 15th, but only after security forces forcefully entered Parliament and detained some opposition lawmakers. This decision allows Sall to remain in office until his successor is likely to be installed in 2025. The opposition in Senegal has criticized the move, considering it a constitutional coup, and suspects that it is part of a plan by the president to extend his term despite his repeated statements that he will not seek re-election. Sall, who has been in power since 2012, is now seeking a resolution to the turmoil. There have been reports suggesting the possibility of a new dialogue with the opposition, including anti-establishment figure Ousmane Sonko, who clashed with the state before being imprisoned last year. Some have proposed granting amnesty to Sonko, his imprisoned deputy Bassirou Diom, and an individual detained during the unrest in 2021 and 2023. The government has not responded to these reports. However, all of this is proving deadly for Senegal in general. Senegal's 8 public universities have gone on a 2-day strike to protest the death of a student during Friday's unrest in the northern city of Saint Louis, according to the main higher education union. Meanwhile, Human Rights Watch reported that at least 271 people were arrested on Friday and Saturday. Former presidents Abdou Diouf and Abdoulaye Wade urged Sall to promptly organize the national dialogue he has announced in a letter sent to AFP attributed to the former leaders. They also called on youth to immediately reject violence, as it has already resulted in deaths. Recently, a 23-year-old man died after being shot during clashes in the capital, Dakar, and a 22-year-old student died on Friday in the northern town of Saint Louis under unclear circumstances. Protests have turned into violent clashes that risk spreading and threatening the entire region. Anger has escalated since President Sall postponed the presidential elections scheduled for February 25 until December, just hours before official campaigning was set to begin. Protests erupted across the country on Friday, with police using tear gas to disperse crowds from a central square in Dakar and closing main roads, rail lines, and major markets. Reporters Without Borders reported that police in Dakar targeted at least 5 journalists. The postponement has drawn criticism from the United States and the European Union. Senegal's parliament supported the decision after security forces forcibly entered the chamber and removed some opposition deputies. The crisis has raised doubts about the country's reputation for democratic stability in a region plagued by military coups. Senegal is facing an identity crisis, as its citizens take pride in being seen as one of West Africa's most stable democracies, and many are furious that this standing is now in jeopardy. Imams gathered in a mosque in the capital, Dakar, expressed their disappointment, feeling betrayed and misunderstood by President Sall's decision. They emphasized that Senegal has never faced a delayed presidential election before and called on the president to reconsider. Regarding ECOWAS's efforts to resolve this conflict, it's unclear what specific actions the organization has taken thus far. ECOWAS is making efforts to resolve conflicts and has called an emergency session focused on African unity. The session aimed to persuade the nations considering withdrawal not to quit the organization. Foreign ministers from West African nations gathered in Abuja, Nigeria's capital, to ease tensions among countries governed by military regimes that have seized power. ECOWAS believes that the postponement of elections in Senegal and the decisions by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger to withdraw from the regional bloc have strained unity in West Africa. Leaders of ECOWAS emphasized the urgent need for diplomacy and solidarity in addressing regional challenges. Yusuf Tuga, Nigeria's foreign minister and chair of the talks, stated that leaders should build upon the progress made in the session and continue their efforts to engage with the affected member states through cooperation and reconciliation. The meeting was prompted by Senegalese President Macky Sall's decision to indefinitely postpone the presidential election scheduled for February 25th due to a dispute over the list of candidates. Furthermore, in late January, the military leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger jointly announced their intention to withdraw from ECOWAS, despite calls from the bloc to restore constitutional order. This has made ECOWAS appear as a bloc that is losing leverage and influence in the region. Consequently, ECOWAS is now attempting to use fear as a means to
encourage the withdrawing members to reconsider, but it is unlikely that this approach will be successful. The United States has expressed concerns about the situation, and the United Nations also wants Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso to remain in ECOWAS.
Countries definitively withdraw from ECOWAS. This has a potential to further exacerbate the challenges that these three countries and the sub-region are facing, notably in the socio-economic and security fields.
The United Nations' desire for Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso to remain in ECOWAS is driven by the understanding that their exit would weaken ECOWAS' control and influence over these countries. Nigerian Foreign Minister Togo warned that the departure of these nations from the regional economic bloc would not only cause hardship for their citizens but also undermine efforts towards regional integration. However, it is worth questioning why ECOWAS, if it truly cared about the citizens, imposed sanctions on these countries on the Western orders. ECOWAS may not have satisfactory answers to this. The emergency session of ECOWAS addressed terrorism, regional integration, and diplomacy. The bloc declared its decision to activate a standby force to combat the existential threat of terrorism faced by the community, including Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. ECOWAS also urged Senegal to adhere to its election timetable, but it is unlikely that these orders will be followed due to ECOWAS' diminished value and weakened position. The region initially formed as a self-sufficient trading bloc has faced turmoil since the coup in Niger last year. Sanctions imposed by ECOWAS hindered imports into Niger, one of the world's poorest countries. ECOWAS has also called on Senegal, one of its most stable member states, to stick to its election timetable. However, critics have questioned the group's influence over member states that increasingly defy its directives. The current crisis in Senegal poses a new challenge for ECOWAS. Political consultant Jidnu Steve Potsa highlights the bloc's powerlessness in the face of the situation. Some analysts express confidence in ECOWAS' ability to address regional issues through long-term mediation. However, the organization's response to the latest appeals in Senegal is being closely monitored as its reputation is at stake. ECOWAS has warned Senegal against jeopardizing peace and stability during challenging times, but it remains unclear what steps the bloc will take if President Sall ignores the warning. One potential action available to ECOWAS is the imposition of trade sanctions, as seen in its response to recent coups in Mali and Niger. However, these sanctions have had significant repercussions on citizens while military regimes maintain control. Experts suggest that financial penalties are not yet practical for Senegal. Increased mediation is seen as a more viable option. Despite grappling with challenges, ECOWAS has demonstrated adaptability, resilience, and capacity to confront most of these issues. It is important to take a long-term perspective on the organization, which was formed in 1975. Senegal, however, is not receptive to advice from anyone, including ECOWAS, as stated by the Senegal foreign minister. Senegal's assertion that it doesn't need external bodies like ECOWAS to dictate its actions regarding the postponed presidential election reflects a belief in its sovereignty and ability to manage internal affairs independently. This position emphasizes Senegal's autonomy and its sole authority to make decisions in its own best interests and for stability without outside interference. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that Senegal's actions are justified. The issue at hand is the extent of ECOWAS' power to peacefully resolve the conflict. ECOWAS, as a regional organization, aims to promote peace, stability, and democratic governance among its member states. Senegal's open defiance of ECOWAS' recommendations undermines the organization's credibility and perceived effectiveness in achieving its objectives. This disagreement has the potential to weaken ECOWAS' ability to enforce its policies and uphold its principles across the region. The perception of ECOWAS' diminished efficacy in mediating conflicts and maintaining harmony among its member states raises questions about its effectiveness as a regional institution and its ability to influence political developments in West Africa. Previous attempts by ECOWAS to intervene in the internal affairs of member states like Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso resulted in resentment and eventual withdrawal from the organization. Senegal's current assertive stance against ECOWAS' interference in its domestic matters reflects a broader sentiment of sovereignty and self-determination. By asserting its autonomy in managing internal affairs independently, Senegal demonstrates its commitment to protecting national interests and challenges the perceived authority of regional bodies like ECOWAS to dictate member states' actions. The implications of Senegal's call for non-interference from ECOWAS are significant for the unity and effectiveness of the organization. If Senegal were to follow the path of other dissenting member states and leave ECOWAS, it would weaken the organization's unity and influence and set a precedent for other states to consider leaving if they feel their sovereignty is under threat.
ECOWAS' response to Senegal's stance is demonstrated by the emergency session it called, acknowledging the seriousness of the situation. This session highlights the need to promptly address the current crisis to prevent further fragmentation and maintain ECOWAS' integrity. It provides a platform for member states to engage in dialogue and find solutions to the challenges facing the organization. Continued dissent and potential exits by member states could ultimately lead to the dissolution of ECOWAS if the organization fails to address internal conflicts and maintain cohesion. This dissolution would have significant implications for regional cooperation, stability, and development in West Africa. It is a moment for ECOWAS to reflect on its objectives. Initially created for mutual development, it appears to have become influenced by Western powers and involved in political motives. Prior to Niger's coup, ECOWAS was effectively facilitating trade between member states and promoting mutual growth. However, the organization's role shifted when France and the European Union offered their support, and ECOWAS chair, who is the president of Nigeria, transformed it into a political forum. This change has led to the current challenges. ECOWAS should now reconsider its role and prioritize economic cooperation over involvement in the internal affairs of member states. The recent withdrawals of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso from ECOWAS, alongside Senegal's defiance of the organization's directives, indicate dissatisfaction among member states with ECOWAS' governance strategy. Instead of fostering stability and democratic governance, ECOWAS interventions have often incited resentment and political unrest in these countries. This pattern suggests that ECOWAS' attempts to influence internal affairs could be counterproductive, leading member states to withdraw. Furthermore, Senegal's rejection of ECOWAS advice highlights the organization's diminishing influence and authority. Senegal's assertion of sovereignty and management of internal affairs reflects a widespread sentiment among member states that ECOWAS interference is unwelcome. If ECOWAS persists in intervening against member countries' wishes, it risks further alienation and erosion of support. Regarding the question of ECOWAS regaining its glory in Africa, it will depend on the organization's ability to adapt, address the concerns of its member states, and refocus its efforts on promoting economic cooperation and stability. The perception of ECOWAS as a West puppet in the Niger coup matter has indeed diminished its respect and credibility. However, with strategic reforms and a renewed emphasis on its original objectives, ECOWAS has the potential to rebuild its reputation and regain influence in Africa. Please share your thoughts on the changing dynamics and increasing conflicts in Africa in the comments section below. If you enjoy this type of content, consider subscribing to our channel and clicking the notification bell icon. We are committed to bringing you videos on lesser discussed topics such as Black culture, civilization history, and evidence of the greatness of Black people. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for our next video.